Good morning. I'm happy to be here to present my culminating project entitled Dreaming and the Creative Process. To begin, I'd like to thank Bunny Payne Clemay and Lloyd Arbach. I'm grateful for the support and guidance that they offered to me as my mentors as I headed down an uncertain road to creating my culminating project. As mentors, they helped me to stay on track, not only on this project, but in the classroom setting as well. I value their opinions, and I want to thank them again for their time and efforts to assist me in reaching my goal. I'd also like to tell you a little bit about my background, which I feel affected the characters and the story content of my project. I learned about Edgar Cayce at a very young age in church, shown here in a photo taken in Sunday school at St. Mark Methodist Church in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1965. I'm the only kid who's smiling, indicating for sure that I had fun being there. In my little world, church and home were intertwined. Church was a normal and comfortable part of our life. I learned about life there and at home, about right and wrong and good and evil. These topics figured heavily into my book. I was still in the formative years in this picture, and my experiences there at that church heavily influenced my life and my positive view of the world in general. It is this positive religious background that made it completely comfortable for me to accept the teachings from Edgar Cayce about dreaming and to embrace the topic of dream interpretation wholeheartedly and without any reservations whatsoever. I never knew the meaning of my dreams, but would often relate the more unusual ones to my family. I never really did anything proactive with dreams until I entered Atlantic University's Transpersonal Study Master's Degree program. The classes, the inner life, dreams, meditation, creativity, and imagination, and becoming a teacher of dream work and dream interpretation were ultimately helpful in garnering material for writing, which is something I never thought I'd be doing. As the dream classes instructed, I kept a dream journal. That's when the floodgates opened. Suddenly, I had an endless supply of topics for writing material, because the more I wrote down my dreams in that journal, the more complex and numerous the dreams became. I began to interpret them as well, giving me insight into my own views and dredging up old memories in the process. The combination of dream topics and life memories being woven into a story was something I was interested in pursuing. Having vivid memories of what it was like to be a child, I knew I could draw on that inspiration to enhance the dream material. Dreams were always interesting to me, but I didn't know what they meant unless it was a literal translation. The idea of a concept coming through in a dream just didn't register with me until I began interpreting my dreams. I found the dream classes, as well as the nonfiction writing on transpersonal subjects class, to be extremely valuable to me personally and also in the creation of my project. The dream classes set me up with the topics in my dream journals, and the writing class helped me to develop the material into something readable. My life experiences and memories helped to fill out the characters and situations based on the unusual things I've seen in my lifetime. I was taking the class Becoming a Teacher of Dream Work and Dream Interpretation when I had a wish fulfillment dream. I was observing a beauty pageant, wishing that I could have taken part in it. To explain why I had the dream about this particular topic, I need to relate a bit of my personal background. I was a pageant girl during my teens and early 20s. Despite my parents' objections, I entered the beauty contest with the hope of winning. My dream while taking the class in December of 2014 was as follows. I was in the back of an auditorium and I saw that a beauty pageant was taking place on stage. I was astonished when I realized all the contestants were middle-aged like me. I even recognized them as some old classmates from back in my high school days. I watched them and I thought about how much I wish I could have been in the pageant too. And in a split second, I was catapulted onto the stage with them. It was time for the talent portion of the contest. I began to sing. My voice was so beautiful. I was thrilled when they announced that I was the winner. In reality, I never won a pageant. The dream, when interpreted, stirred up something in the back of my mind. My parents suspected that all the pageants were rigged because of politics. So emerged the topic of fraud and politics. It proved to be a heads up when I recognized the same topics in the next dream, an even more incredible one. I had another dream in December of 2014. I had quickly descended into sleep after prayer and meditation, in which I gave myself a dream suggestion. I need a topic for my culminating project. I then had what was for me a really wild and unusual dream in which I saw darling little card people. They were cartoon-like characters similar to fairies or elves, but they were just little cards, small enough to fit in my palm. They all had human characteristics along with one other distinction. They were related to each other, so they all had the last name that was the same, Card. The tiny card people had an elfin quality to them, but it might have been their size alone that gave me that impression. One thing's for sure, they desperately wanted me to pay attention to them. They did not speak, but conveyed their message to me with their mind. The characters were entertaining me as if I was attending a show and seemed quite anxious to please me and show me what they could do. Then suddenly the mood changed. The cards revealed to me that they were being abused. They conveyed to me their displeasure with the state of the world and their part in it. They were extremely distressed at what was happening to them, as they felt human beings were using them in unethical ways. Even though the cards themselves had no control over the way certain people were misusing them, they had still developed a collective guilt about what they had ultimately become, enablers of government waste and the poster boys of socialism. Consequently, they felt the country was heading in the wrong direction, and they knew they were part of the problem. I then heard an unknown male voice say, "Royal flush, the house of cards." Then the dream was over. I didn't understand the dream at first. I wrote down the dream characters' names in my journal upon awakening and was surprised to see what it looked like on the written page. Ebb T, Rossi, and W. Elf Air were the names of the characters. When I saw the characters' names next to each other, I realized who the card people were and what they were trying to tell me. I realized Ebb T was an EBT card, a type of debit card that the government loads money onto for the entitlement programs, to use. You can see this button at the checkout counter at a grocery store next to the debit and credit. Rossi was, of course, the race card, and W. Elf Air represented the welfare programs. I was initially disappointed that this was the topic that came to me in the dreams, because I definitely had my fill of politics when I worked at the American Embassy in Ankara, Turkey over 25 years ago. The card people in my dreams represented government entitlement programs, which, while serving a legitimate and essential purpose, seemed to be morphing into something not originally intended. Somehow I needed to reflect that in my project. In unraveling the meaning of those words, royal flush, the house of cards, I discovered that a royal flush is related to the game poker, which is an unbeatable hand and contains, among other cards, an ace, a king, a queen, and a jack. The cards in my book would ultimately be these very cards. Wikipedia says poker is a family of gambling card games. In reading this passage, I cannot help but notice the terms family and card. As it turns out, my cards would be a family. In the combination of cards and poker, some of them remain hidden until the end of the game. This would play into the surprise ending of my book, which has been my trademark way of writing stories in the past, revealing a name that no one expects. Playing cards also gives another clue in the interpretation. Something was being played. The fact that the characters, once they introduced themselves to me and happily performed for a while, began to cry indicated that something was going wrong in the game. The flush was not literally a toilet flushing, but a symbol that something was being discarded. I determined what was being wasted. It was money, opportunity, and common sense. The plan for my creative project was now clear. I was going to take the basic idea, welfare reform, that was presented in my dream and turn it into a book, striving to make it unobjectionable to other people and hopefully change a few minds. I did feel the current path the country was following had gone awry, and politicians were even unwilling to broach the subject under the current conditions. In this important presidential election year, no one is talking about the subject occurring in my dream. However, it's likely that everyone is interested in it, they're just afraid to bring it up. The dream insisted that I bring it up. The card characters in my book were to be a family with a special purpose here on earth. to help people by promoting health and welfare with a full understanding of the power of diversity and equality under the law. However, as we all know, even with good intentions, sometimes unintended consequences occur when no one's watching the till and things start to get out of hand. I felt myself that the entitlement programs had become a real mess. I typed the words entitlement mess on Google. The words third rail came up. By definition, Wikipedia says the third rail of a nation's politics is a metaphor for any issue so controversial that it is charged and untouchable. Any politician or public official who dares to broach the subject will invariably suffer politically. I concluded that this certainly fit the topic I wanted to discuss. Then I remembered my husband had said something about the country being off track. I thought of the term third rail as potentially being an idea that the story could be about a train that's gone off the track. I read further. When I researched the term third rail in a railway, it was described as the exposed electrical conductor that carries high voltage power. Stepping on the high voltage third rail usually results in electrocution. The use of the term in politics serves to emphasize the shock that comes from raising the controversial idea and the political death or political suicide that the unaware or provocative politician would encounter as a result. I gave my book a title, 3 Little Cards and Their Third Rail Journey. I had moments of doubt and worry during the creation of the project. I told my husband I was very concerned about it and didn't know what to do next because it is an awkward subject. He was about to get on an airplane and fell asleep thinking about my problem. When he talked to me after he landed, he said he'd had a dream about something called Texas Holdem. When I looked up that term online, I read it's a variation of the game poker. Aha, there was the word card again. He mentioned that many important and beneficial civil rights and social programs were implemented and significantly expanded while a Texan was in the White House back in the 1960s. According to the Texas state legislature, the game Texas Holdem originated in a town called Robstown, Texas. This is interesting to me because my husband's name is Rob. So that's how a major character, the Big Texan, was written into the book. This was not the first time my husband and I have dreamed potential solutions for one another. Once the character was in place, I could easily go back in history and define a few more who had led the programs, specifically the Squire of Hyde Park, who had started it all. I needed a plot for the story. The idea that a card game was being played was obvious in the meaning of the dream. It wasn't a literal card game in the ordinary sense, but a little private card game dreamed up by the Squire of Hyde Park. In writing a story, I found that a formula helps to tie it together. I needed to give the set of characters one common denominator other than just being a family of cards. Since the card characters had already performed for me in the dream, it was easy to imagine the kinds of things that they would do, but I needed more than that. They had to be on some sort of helpful mission, too. Once again, I considered a train journey with the cards as passengers on a train for goodwill that veers off track because it's been taken over by a conductor with a hidden agenda. It would be easy to imagine, too, because my family worked in the railroad industry. This is my grandfather in the 1920s. And this is my dad in the 1940s. Dad worked for the railroad for nearly 40 years. Even my nickname is the name of a train. So the common denominator I chose for all the characters in the book was the train. But now I face the stark realization I was writing a book on politics. Now that the topic based on my dream was in place, I had to take the hot button topic of the entitlement programs and make it palatable. The whole thing felt awkward, as I said. I was aware that I had to be mindful and respectful of those using the cards. Above all, I felt the card characters had to have hearts of human beings within them, along with human traits, so people would feel an affinity and compassion for them. I didn't really know how the story was going to end. I just let it take off and see where it wanted to go. My creative intuition reminded me that there had to be a lesson in the story, and it had to be based on what those cards revealed to me in that dream. Remembering that the cards were suffering and wanted my help reminded me that it would not all be fun and games. The subject of welfare reform is quite serious in reality, so I needed to present obstacles and bring in a villain. I began to develop the characters. The origin of Eb T. At first, I thought his name might present a problem with being acceptable to readers. Then I remembered that Southern names are often 2 syllables or words, like Ernest Ray or Jack Benny in Coal Miner's Daughter, or Ernest T. Bass from the Andy Griffith Show. After remembering Ernest T. Bass, I realized the reader would most likely have no problem accepting the name Eb T. In the dream, he reminded me of a character on a TV show when I was growing up. It was called Green Acres. The actor who played him, Tom Lester, a fellow Mississippian, visited our school when I was in about the 3rd or 4th grade. His presentation in our school auditorium was about religion. The auditorium was packed that day as he revealed how he discovered God's plan for him. I remember that day vividly, so I drew on that memory to help create this character who exuded extreme self-confidence and showmanship, just like this man did on the TV show and in real life. Because of my positive religious background, I also wanted to bring religion into the story somehow without anyone blatantly noticing. Using this man as a character in my story was enough to satisfy me that a religious character was now in the book. The origin of W. Elf Air. W. Elf Air was a combination of several characters, the likes of which included Mikhail Baryshnikov, who I saw in New York City in 36 years ago, and he was sitting 2 tables away from me, and I couldn't stop staring at him because he looked so perfect. So he had the body of Mikhail Baryshnikov, but W. Elf Air had the personality and enthusiasm of health and fitness guru Richard Simmons. Very upbeat and enthusiastic, getting everyone up and exercising at the train depot so they'd be ready for their future job interviews that they didn't even have yet. He insisted that everyone join in. This idea came from a bus tour I took in Hollywood. The driver waited a bit in front of Richard Simmons' house, and he told us one time Mr. Simmons had actually come outside and motioned for all the tourists to come off the bus, and he had them exercising on his front lawn. W. Elf Air had a distinctive face. He was unlike any human I've ever met. He reminded me of a time when I was in the Brownies, the early requirements of becoming a Girl Scout. When we had a Brownie meeting, we had to walk up to the front of the room and put our dues, a dime, into the back of the ceramic elf's head. The brownie gold elf face is what W. Elf Air's face looked like in my dream. By definition, a brownie is a figure in folklore that's another name for an elf. The brownie gold is symbolic of money, which is a major factor in my book. The origin of Rossi. Rossi was such a sweet thing, and the best description I can give you is that he was like the younger version of Clarence the Angel in It's a Wonderful Life. He was non-confrontational, understanding, shy, but with a sense of humor and boyishness. His visual appearance was a little bit sloppy and unkempt like Clarence, but you couldn't help but love him, his beautiful smile and his kind spirit. But his actions reminded me of the ghost of Christmas Present from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, not from a physical standpoint, but in the manner of his mission in life. Like the ghost, Rossi had the power to make people apologize and make things right again. So this is the ghost of Christmas Present with his horn of plenty that he would wave around to make people behave themselves. The origin of the Squire. I envisioned the Squire to be like Mr. Moneybags from the game Monopoly. To me, he symbolized money, which is necessary for setting up the little private card game. The Squire wisely prepared for the programs to be supported in the future by someone that he himself had chosen. The origin of the Big Texan. The Big Texan was a reference to the Marlboro Man, a giant Marlboro Man billboard who reigned atop a Space Needle tower in the town of Ankara, Turkey, when we lived there in 1989 to 1991. The Turks would rally to the side of the tower to see the Marlboro Man billboard while they dined, while the Americans preferred the side with its view of the city's mosques and historic buildings. We used to joke the tower was eventually going to lean because it had too many people on one side, the side of the Marlboro Man. The origin of the villain. The character of the villain is primarily based on my late dad's final boss when he worked for the railroad. The victim on the train ride represents my dad. Once the train was put into the book as a vehicle for the idea, my dad heavily influenced the characters and upheaval in the train ride. Having worked for the railroad during his long career, his final years working there were miserable because of a new boss that the railroad board sent in. The new boss had no experience in the train world, and no one could figure out how in the world he got that job. He wouldn't listen to my dad or anyone else, regardless of the fact that most of them were career railroad men. Yet the higher-ups of the railroad saw fit to send him in, and he was doing things that were very wrong. His actions helped to secure the downfall of the railroad. During my dad's final weeks before he passed away, we talked about a lot of things, including what happened at the end of his career and the things that man had done. I can't elaborate on them, as he might still have relatives alive today, but I can safely say that man ended my dad's career just the same as if he'd thrown him on the third rail. The villain, Vito, was also a reference to the lead character in The Godfather, as per the things my dad told me about his boss. In fact, Dad said he worried for years after he retired and moved away that they were going to come after him for what he knew. As far as the movie The Godfather, I never idolized the character of Vito, although I know many people do. The Italian name of Vito didn't seem to fit the story of being on a train at all, but a twist on the name, Vito with an E instead of an I, was definitely usable because it had political undertones and fit the current situation in Washington. I needed a title for my villain, though. The name Vito just didn't seem to satisfactorily imply his prestige and high rank. Again, I drew on life memories here. Dad passed away while I was attending Atlantic University. A few days later, an old high school friend of mine, young adult author Elizabeth Langston, wrote a story and posted it on Facebook as her tribute to him. I posted it in our forum for the class. The title of her story was To Sir with Love, because she always called my dad Sir. My culminating project was, in a small way, a tribute to my dad, so the title Sir in Sir Vito is in homage to him. He would have loved it. The origin of the hero. The Cards needed a hero, someone they could believe and trust. It turned out to be a member of their own family. I'm not going to reveal who the hero is, since I don't want to spoil the surprise ending of the book, but for those that dislike him, they would think he was just an opportunist who conveniently showed up to be the hero in the book. For those that like him, they would think it was cool that he graciously showed up right on time to be the hero in the book. The choice of hero made it into the story primarily because of his reference in the card gaming world and timing in entering the political race. He was just in the right place at the right time, and when I was at an impasse in the story and I needed to win the game, I had to pull the trump card to win the game and save the train. It became a sad journey. I tried drawing the characters in the story, but I realized I lacked the artistic skills to adequately portray them. Therefore, like the cards, I reached within my own family to find a solution. I called my son Mike from California and offered to buy a plane ticket for him to come home from Los Angeles and embark on a journey of a different kind, providing illustrations for 3 little cards and their third rail journey. He was able to capture the spirit of the characters very well, I think. The villain needed to be a memorable and emotionless character, so he was drawn that way. His uniform is symbolic in that it is unyielding, as was his character. His uniform was intentionally stiff with a high collar. There were no wrinkles in it, indicating that he stood there stoically, rather than sitting around relaxing like a normal person would do. In a way, he was non-human to me and more like something from another planet sent in to wreak havoc. He also didn't have a heart, which is self-explanatory when you read the book. I envisioned Vito as an alien from another planet, totally disconnected from our reality here on planet Earth. This was demonstrated in the text of the book with his total disregard towards information from seasoned professionals in his quest to fulfill his destiny. Meandering through the hills, he rarely speaks to the cards. He has nothing in common with them except that he's driving their train. So he needed sort of a stoic, detached look, which I believe Mike captured. I especially like the rose-colored glasses effect he created, as it's the only color used in the illustrations of the book, with the exception of the heart on the love train. The rose-colored glasses worn by Sir Vito lent a Wizard of Oz feeling to the book for me. However, in the book, the rose-colored glasses have a more symbolic meaning. One is that the bloom is off the rose regarding the entitlement programs. In other words, they aren't looking so pretty anymore. The other is that Sir Vito thought he would look cool and more like the Squire of Hyde Park if he wore those little round glasses. His being a rookie and newcomer, he thought it would make him look like he fit in and he belonged, so that no one would question what he was about to do, take the train in a different direction. The fact that he chose rose-colored lenses was to intimate that he fully intended to look at his own little world through rose-colored glasses, meaning that he would be seeing things other than they actually were, fantasy rather than reality. In what I felt was one of Mike's best illustrations, this is the most dramatic and tragic scene in the book, Murder on the Love Train. I included the murder in the story for a reason, to emphasize the symbolic death that would happen to the entitlement programs if they continued to veer off course and eventually self-implode. Despite the hopelessness illustrated here, the book does have a happy ending. In writing Three Little Cards and their third rail journey, I developed the three characters based on a card dream. After interpreting the dream's meaning, I developed a storyline based on what it revealed, politics and fraud. Bringing in my son Mike to help provide the visual images of the characters to enhance the story for my readers was a great idea. Some of the character development was inspired during daily walks along the Potomac. I found I was more open to mind suggestions as I took those walks. Information was funneling into my head so fast that I had to hurry home quickly to write it all down. And I would estimate that 90% of the story came from those walks on the water, where I had a clear view of the Capitol building and the Washington Monument, famous, of course, for politics. Being close to the water seemed to have a creative effect on me. It's as if I had to be close to the water to receive the ideas. In Three Little Cards and their third rail journey, there were a lot of liberties taken to suit the plot. The absurdity of the characters based on FDR and LBJ having no objection to the final conductor was part of the fun of the story to me. The cards themselves avoided a stereotype and deliberately reached out to the other side when it became imminent that they needed to be rescued. The cards were not only distraught by the way the recipients of the programs were behaving, they were feeling sad themselves, not realizing yet that the people were stealing their joy by taking away their joy of giving. And the people themselves had become incapable of gratitude and thankfulness, so everyone was equally miserable. Even the train itself began to take on human qualities of bleeding and sickness. The solution was to bring someone on board who could stop the train. It turned out that none of the individual cards could have saved the train alone. It took all of them, plus their card cousins' leadership, to make it happen. If there had been discord among them, or if they just hated them for having money, the train would have wrecked, killing them all and the programs. By saving them all, the cousin made it possible for the love train to have new beginnings. On a side note, there were new beginnings for me as well. I enjoyed spending time walking by the water, and I wanted to simplify my life so I'd have more time to write. I took action, made a radical change, and last week my husband and I moved on board a boat. This never would have happened if I hadn't spent so much time in contemplation walking by the water. My creative project question was to determine whether or not dreams enhance creativity in writing. I believe the answer is yes. The card dream gave me increased clarity and vision in both dream recall and interpretation. As I explored potential story ideas, I was hyper-aware of things around me that I had never noticed before. In other words, I was mindful. In receiving my dream of the cards, I was given a topic to write about that came as a complete surprise to me. This particular dream reached deep within my subconscious to tap into my belief system. Anyone who has a belief system is going to be passionate about heartfelt causes. Therefore, I developed creativity because I cared about the subject matter previously hidden away in my mind. Even though people do not want to talk openly with each other about the underlying challenges that we will collectively face together, perhaps the people we should be talking to anyway are the children. That's why the characters were presented to me as cartoon-like and elfin, something like a child would listen to and potentially watch. I just had to learn to recognize the way the dream spoke to me. It gave me a visual image to build on. In my case, the role of dreaming and creative writing was not only to present an appropriate subject, but to put me on high alert for ideas to convey the point. I was really paying attention to what was going on around me while I was writing this book. Dreams can be the catalyst for amazing stories based in subject matter dear to the dreamer. I believe the message of my dream was that the spirit of charity must always be tempered with wisdom. That includes enacting and obeying laws to provide safeguards against how the entitlement money can be spent. Writing this book has been a labor of love. I hope the book will inspire and entertain, and that its hidden message of helping others will resonate. It is yet to be seen if this book is a case of life imitating art, or maybe the other way around. Therefore, I intend to keep an open mind. I look forward to a simpler life, having time for writing, rather than cleaning a big house, dreaming rather than waking up early to commute, and living on the water, which seems to inspire my dreams in writing. It is also ironic that we are living in a marina called the Gangplank, which to me symbolizes what I will be going through if this book ever gets published. It'll be like walking the plank. I'm aware of the criticism that I'll receive due to the third rail politics the book entails, but if it changes a few minds and sets the country headed in the right direction, writing 3 little cards in their third rail journey will have been worth it. In conclusion, I wanted to thank my son Mike for coming home and assisting in bringing my characters to life. This is him hard at work drawing the characters. Not only did he do great work, it was wonderful to spend time with him, as I don't get to see him or my son Rob Jr. nearly as often as I would like. And that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions.